We're going now. I wasn't swearing, was I?
No.
No.
Okay, looks like we are live streaming on Facebook. So hello, Facebook. Good to see everyone today. So as usual, we're here for the Thursday episode of Live Lunch, 12 o'clock noon, almost on the dot. It's really hard when you're going live because we use Zoom. There's just this tiny bit of a delay. And there's always a delay anyway when you go live on Facebook, but it just adds to that delay. So you end up in this kind of like, you try and time it so you go bang on at 12 o'clock, but something always happens. Either they've changed the interface and it's just not working properly, or you're just watching the screen and things are whirring and not actually doing what they're going to do. So there's always a bit of a nervous moment there. But we're here, we're live, and every couple of weeks we've been bringing on a guest with us, and this week we've got Karen from Market Energy, who is absolutely fantastic. So Karen, just give us a quick introduction. Obviously we all know what you do, but yeah, let's tell the world.
Yeah, well, I'm a marketing consultant, and I've worked in marketing, all my working life, previously for other people, and then about 20 years ago I decided that I would set it by myself, specifically looking to offer marketing support to people who really that either didn't have the kind of budgets or the need for a full-time marketing person. So the service that I offer, you can dip out of as you want to. And then I've also been working with the Green Umbrella guys for quite a while. I'm one of their blog writers, and have sort of worked with a number of the people there for over many different roles and many years. So kind of feel like I'm a bit of the furniture now.
Absolutely, a steady fixture, definitely.
Yeah, I'm not sure I really want to be described like that, but I'll take it.
It was really funny, actually. Just obviously we kind of get together just sort of 5-10 minutes before we go live, and I think most of us have really regular communication with you, but then it was like Pam came on, she was like, Karen, I'm Pam. Actually, this is the first time you guys have met, first time Emily and you have met. So yeah. It's weird. Sometimes you work with people, and even you're local to us, so there's there's really no excuse for us not to have seen more of you. But
no,
it's really bizarre.
I think we just, we all tend to get into kind of remote communications, don't we? And, those kind of face-to-face meetings seem to have gone out the door. Well, obviously, recently for a specific reason, but even before that, I think people tend to kind of, just dash off an email rather than think to kind of meet up with someone. Yeah. So, yeah, it's nice to see everyone's faces.
Absolutely. So, we've worked on several clients together over the years, and I know when we were sort of talking about who we could invite on and that kind of stuff, Pam and Emily were sort of quite keen to talk to you about the blogging piece, your approach, and Pam, actually, I think I haven't brought it up with Pam, but I think she upset Amanda when we were having that conversation, because she was like, Karen's the best blog writer ever. And Amanda's face was just like, oh, really?
I could just go back and say, I went outside Green Umbrella. I didn't finish my sentence.
Good save, Pat. Good save.
Good save, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was like, hello.
I meant certainly for me anyway. That's okay.
But I think that
Karen is very efficient at what she does. That's all I'm saying.
So go on, what questions have we got for Karen then? What are we going to throw at her?
Who wants to go for Pam? Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I do, because I know that I've sent some very technical and I don't know, well, they seem quite challenging types of blogs your way, and yet you just turn them. I've sent you many emails going, oh my god, how did you do this so quickly? And I wondered how you kind of how you approach that and how you manage to turn blogs around. Sometimes you turned them around for me in less than 24 hours. And I'm kind of like, whoa, how do you do that?
Yeah, well, I think it's a combination of things. I think it's partly my experience. You know, I've been writing copy for 35 years or more. So, you know, it doesn't daunt me to kind of sit with a blank piece of paper and think, right, I've got to write something, because I'm used to doing it. I also had a spell as an account director in a marketing agency. And what that taught me was that you have to pick up on different industries quite rapidly. So, you know, you might suddenly have a new client that's given to you that's in an industry you've never dealt with before, you've got no knowledge of. So you've got to quickly get to understand, you know, what the issues are in that industry. So sort of that spell in a marketing agency helped me to do that. I think the key thing is not to be scared to get started. You know, I know many people will look at that blank piece of paper, think, I don't know what the devil I'm going to say, so, you know, I'll put it off till tomorrow. And, you know, my advice would be just start. And if it's a tricky one, what I tend to do is sort of, you know, put some key search terms into Google, try and find 4 or 5 different sources of information.
Okay.
And then read through those and see if there's some key themes coming out, which, you know, there always are some commonality between pieces written on a subject, and just try and get some subheads down. So if I can start with a heading and 4 or 5 subheads, then that's kind of, you at least feel you've done something, you've made a start on it. You know, and sometimes it just flows. Sometimes, you know, I can write a blog very quickly and you know, it just comes together. But other times, it is trickier and more challenging. And I find that if you write a little bit and then come back to it, that helps. If you can maybe just get your intro done, sort of, you know, go away, come back to it a couple of hours later, or maybe the next day, and then sort of, you know, do another section of it, and just tackle those tricky ones in 2 or 3 chunks, rather than try to do it all in one fell swoop. That helps.
Yeah, that's good. That's good advice, because I do tend to sort of sometimes look at subjects, you know, Christina goes, could you write about this? And I'll be like, I'll leave that till tomorrow.
That's exactly what Kevin said as well, when he was giving some tips on copywriting about walk away. You know, sometimes write it, then walk away. So I think that's kind of a theme coming through with copywriters and blog writers, are saying it's, yeah, you don't have to do the full polished article all in one go.
Yeah, and one thing I always do, when I've written it, I never send it off straight away. Even when I think it's finished, I'll just, you know, put it in my drafts, and maybe even a half an hour later, come back to it and read it again, just to see, you know, kind of whether there's any tweaks or anything doesn't quite fall right.
I think that's quite a good tip as well, to be honest, because something that I do is I tend to write it, and then I have in the past sort of read it all through, sent it off, come back to it again to read it the next day, just out of interest, because I've basically forgotten what I've written. And then there's certain elements in there that I think, actually, now that I'm looking at it again with fresh eyes, I might have worded that slightly differently, or I might have changed that. So I think actually to write it exactly as you said, and then leave it even for half an hour or something, and then go back to it, you quite often, or I've learned that I've quite often picked up on things that I would change slightly. They're not always like major changes or anything, but there's definitely changes within that I wouldn't have picked up on the first time round, I don't think. Yeah,
it might be something as simple as just changing one word. You know,
yeah.
You just think of a better way to put something, better way to express something.
Yeah.
So yeah, I find it works for me.
Definitely. I also think as well what you said about breaking the blog down, that's something that I find really helps me when writing blogs. So when I sort of first started, I guess it would be that fear, I guess, of looking at the blank piece of paper with a subject that I might not fully know about, thinking, how on earth am I going to fill this piece of paper with tons of information about this subject I don't know that much about? But I think to break it down for me, as you said, so come up with the subheadings, maybe write the intro, to then have that feeling that I've actually got started with it. I know the areas that I'm going to focus on and which subjects I need to research. really helps break it down for me and makes it not so daunting that I'm sort of putting it off and keep putting it off and putting it off until I have to do it in an hour, basically.
Yes, that's right. You know, you leave it till the 11th hour, and then it is a mad rush, isn't it?
Definitely.
But yeah, I think it is that feeling that you've made some progress on it, you know, even if it is a tricky one to tackle, and that makes it easier to go back to it and carry on with it.
Definitely. One question that I had actually was about coming up with titles for blogs. So we have a lot of clients that sometimes, even if they're not clients that we write blogs for, they sometimes ask us for ideas for titles. And I'd say that's probably an area that I struggle with. I always try to sort of research other blogs around a similar subject and maybe see if that gives me some ideas. But do you have any tactics for coming up with titles for blogs?
Yeah, well, what I do is, you know, I take the general theme of the blog and I quite often Google famous sayings around that. And, you know, sometimes that doesn't generate anything, but occasionally it'll come up with something. I mean, quite a good one the other week. I think it was about how companies are kind of evolving under the current circumstances to, you know, remote working and hybrid working and, you know, all the kind of different ways that workplaces are having to change. And I came across a Darwin phrase, which was, you know, I'm paraphrasing, but basically it's not the cleverest or the brightest species that survive, it's the most adaptable. And I just thought, God, that's spot on, you know, for this blog. And I kind of, you know, incorporated that into the title of it. Because I think, you know, obviously the title is quite important because that's what encourages people to read on. And so, you know, try to find something that at least just sparks someone's interest to think, oh, you know, what's that about? So so I've just written one I've sent back to you this morning, Christina, where I just kind of could have put the title, you know, that was in the email, but I just tried to spin it around a bit and kind of, you know, make it a bit interesting so that people will read it and think, oh, you know, what is that?
See, that's something I never would have thought of. I'd never have thought of to Google phrases or sayings or anything like that. I think, like I said, the way that I really do it is I try to think of maybe something with alliteration or something that sounds quite nice, or Google the subject and see the titles that other people have used and maybe try and play on that a little bit. But then I always find that really difficult because I see something that I think sounds really good and then I can't get that out of my head. And I'm like, damn it.
You don't want to pinch someone else's
title. Exactly. That's really good. Thank you.
But the quotation thing, you know, I'd say 50% of the time it throws up something that's usable. And again, sometimes I find that, you know, I might just put quite a boring title to begin with, and then when you go back to it, you know, inspiration might strike while you're doing something else, and you know, then you can go back to it and change it.
Yeah, that's true, definitely.
So alliteration. So
love a bit of alliteration.
Well, okay, so first of all, well done, Emily, that was a very big word.
Oh, thank you. See, I do know some things up here.
That one wasn't even rehearsed. Well done.
Gold star for me.
But yeah, alliteration is a really funny thing because I do love it, but then I look at titles sometimes and I think, right, I need to come up with at least one idea where I haven't used alliteration. You know, sometimes it is just like overdone. So yeah, what do you reckon? How do we feel about alliteration? Do you think it gets over-egged or?
Yeah, I think it can do. I think it can sound a bit forced, you know, if you overdo it, but sometimes it does just fall right and sounds right. I think, you know, you just have to judge each one on its merits and say, you know, is that working or does it sound a bit, you know, like I'm trying too hard?
I always find if I'm searching for it too much, like if I think, right, I really need to think of a word that fits this, that begins with S, and I'm literally sat there for about 20 minutes trying to make something work, and no, it's not going to work.
Yeah, it's got to fall naturally, I think, as you say. If you try to just jam stuff in, that is, it just doesn't work.
I was thinking about like forced title as well, that you kind of just go, no, that's not right, you know. So.
It's like if you're writing, they call them listicles, don't they? But basically an article that's kind of a list and it's X number of reasons for. A lot of the time when we're writing, I'll write the list and then just do the title afterwards, because sometimes I don't know how many points I'm going to raise.
Yeah.
So, and I know, Christina, you've got a thing about, is it even numbers or odd numbers? So whichever one it is, you'll either say like 9 reasons, or you do 8 reasons and then one for luck.
Yeah, so yeah, it's the title. Yeah, the title's always odd numbers. It's like 3, 5s and 7s always seem to.
Yeah, for some reason, psychologically, odd numbers are more interesting to people than even numbers. It applies to all sorts of things. You know, if you're grouping things on a shelf, if you put a group of 3 or 5, it looks more sort of, you know, aesthetically pleasing than 2 or 4. And yeah, same with lists of things.
I would say that with visual merchandising, when I used to work in the shop, it's obviously even odd numbers of things that you put in a window display as well.
Oh, that's interesting.
Ooh. Yep, some psychology behind it then.
Yeah, but I think you're right. Sometimes actually the title might be the last thing that you write. So you've written the rest of the blog, and kind of once you've done that, the title becomes a bit more apparent to you. It kind of, you know, something that sums up the key point that you're trying to get across. Just, you know, sort of inspiration strikes at the end.
I think that's another thing that I need to learn, really, because whilst I have got better at breaking down the blog, as I was saying before, I think I always try to come up with the title, and I think I can't write a blog if I don't have a title.
Yeah.
But actually it's not really the case. I think as well, because I know that's the part that I struggle with the most, I always want to get it done. So then I think, well, I have my title, I have my subheadings, now I can write it, but I need to maybe get the main title element out of my head and think I can, like you said, when you write the blog, sometimes you do come up with ideas, and I've actually gone back before and changed the title after I've written it. So to spend so much time in the first place might not be sort of needed as much, I guess.
I'm really, really good at writing blogs without titles, then sending them to Jane or sending them to Amanda, just basically saying, sort it out.
You send them to me quite a lot, going, can you just proofread this? Oh, and come up with a title.
Gosh, I really don't know. There was one blog actually, Christina, I think, it was a very similar situation, and you asked sort of everyone to come up with 5 ideas, and I was there, I can't come up with 5, I can't even come up with 1. I was like, I could probably write it if you give me a bit of time, but I can't come up with the title.
I think when you put on the spot like that, it's quite tricky. It's quite hard to, you know, kind of be creative on demand, isn't it?
I think so.
It's really weird. But trying to do it for a client is 20 times easier for some reason. It's just actually having to do it for yourself, for your own brand. It's like I don't know, it's like all these blocks come down, and you know, it's very
the trickier thing, and Karen, you've probably got some thoughts on this, is like you say, writing for a client is sometimes easier, and you can get the facts and the information. It's getting the tone of voice and the language they use, and that can take a little while. So you must sometimes only 3 or 4 articles, but certainly the first couple, I often find I use phrases that are a bit more personal to me, and the client, you know, I've had an example this morning where I've just put in an email, jump straight to book here, and someone's gone, oh no, take that out, I don't like it. Which is fine, it's fair enough, it's the first one I've written for them, but that's language I would use and not them. So how do you get around that?
Yeah, well, you know, I think my natural style is quite informal and chatty, you know, and I you know, for not just for blogs but for all content, that actually works quite well, because you know, one of the things I was taught is to write as you speak. So which is why it's always a good idea to read out loud anything that you've written and just see if it flows naturally. But I mean, what I normally do with a new client is just kind of write, yeah, obviously I'll look at what else they've done, look at their website and you know, any other material that's available to get a bit of a feel for their tone. But I'll kind of just write the first one really in my natural style, maybe just tweaking it a little bit, and then just wait for feedback. And if they sort of say, well, we want to be a bit more formal. And, certain kinds of companies, sometimes if you're writing for, a law firm, for example, they might want to be a bit more formal than, an activity centre would be, which would be very, generally very, informal and friendly. But I think I think companies are moving more towards that kind of personal approach where they want to be perceived as approachable, and as people rather than a faceless organisation. So I find that informal approach is generally, sort of what people want, but you just have to kind of tweak it a little bit. I mean, one tip I was given, which people sometimes raise an eyebrow at, but use Anglo-Saxon words rather than Latin words. So and so if you think like utilise is a Latin-based word, and it's my personal hated word actually, because it just isn't needed. Use, don't say utilise, say use, because it's just much easier to understand, much easier to read. But if you just try and think of the sort of generally the shorter, more to the point words tend to be the Anglo-Saxon version of the words, and they just, it's not even that people don't understand the longer words, it's just makes it more accessible and more readable if you use words that people can just instantly pick up on.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I think that's something that I've probably learned as well more recently, because obviously through my degree and studies, I was always sort of, I guess, going for the longer words because they make me sound more intellectual. But actually, like sort of writing, I think, as you said, my style is much more informal, I found now, and writing, sort of choosing those shorter words doesn't necessarily make it worse. It actually, in a way, makes it better. It's much more readable, and for me especially, it's much more approachable. Like my pet peeve is when people throw in words that are just unnecessary and long for no reason, just to try and make them sound clever, basically. It just really bugs me. So yeah, I think that's a good point, definitely. And it makes it easier to write. Thanks, Magda.
I don't agree. I concur.
I think people add in extra words to get their word count up sometimes as well. And that's something else I always do when I review it. I just think, are there any unnecessary words here that we can cut out? And you find, people who aren't so used to writing copy will put things in quite not complicated, but a long-winded way, where actually you've got a sentence and you can cut out half of those words and still get the sense across, in a much more straightforward fashion.
Yeah, definitely.
I do think people get hung up on the word counts. They're like, it's we talk to a lot of people that are just starting out when it comes to creating regular content. So whether it's going to be a video, or whether it is going to be a written blog or whatever, a solid article. But they get really, really caught up on how many words it needs to be. And I think in those early stages, it's like that has to be irrelevant. You need to write something. Once you're in a bit of writing something, then you can start looking at word counts and improving structure and that sort of stuff. But I think a lot of people, they like really agonize it, and it's like 800, 500 words, 800 words, and they're so caught up worrying about that it just paralyzes them.
It is a common question, isn't it? That you go, well, how many words does the blog need to be? Yeah, it does become a bit sort of you're like, well, just start writing it first of all, like you say, and see how many words you can come up with.
I mean, I know there are issues with word count, so it impacts on SEO issues, for example. But again, something I was taught is that like, the length of what you're writing is less important, it's the relevance and the interest. So, if you can get your point across in an interesting way in 600 words, don't pad it out to 1,000 words just for the sake of it, because it's not adding anything. Now, as I say, I know that sometimes you do need a certain word length to, I mean, I read the other day that LinkedIn articles are meant to be, or are most read if they're sort of 800 plus words, which is something I hadn't come across before. I instantly went back to all the LinkedIn articles. I rendered a word count, found out that none of them were meeting the criteria. But these algorithms change all the time, don't they? trying to keep up with them is a challenge in itself.
No, absolutely. I mean, LinkedIn as well, there's so many changes and so regularly, and there's so many changes that we don't even know about. They never get broadcasted anywhere. They're just testing something, and they're just testing it with a group of people on this group of servers, you know, so you don't know.
Yeah.
But the last few weeks anyway, everything on LinkedIn just seems to have had a nosedive from an algorithmic perspective, from a reach perspective. And it's funny because a few weeks ago they did release an article, I think it was like from the engineering blog, and they'd been testing this thing, and they've released this change relating to dwell time. So actually, you know, right now, I don't care how long that blog is, because right now, when they see that post in the feed, whether they pause to look at that or not is going to affect the algorithm before they've even opened and clicked through to look at it anyway. So it is, we just kind of put all this stuff on the wordage when actually it's like, you know, is the title right? You know, that the article is going to be the length that it is because that's how many words it takes to tell that story or communicate that point. You know, if it's 352 words, that's what it is. If you turn that into 600 words, it becomes a really dull article. You know, so it's so tricky. But I think that it's almost like we're worried about the finished result when we need to worry more about getting there in the first place.
Yeah, and you definitely do see blogs where people have specifically tried to increase the word count, because it's basically one idea that they've just kind of expressed in 3 different ways, and that's not adding value to anyone. It you know, just becomes boring to read if you're sort of plowing through an article and it's just the same ideas again and again.
Absolutely. So let's move the conversation on a little bit. So Karen, you work with a lot of sort of businesses in the AV world, don't you? The audio.
I do. The audiovisual world, yeah.
So what kind of changes are you seeing there, or trends are you seeing in terms of like how those, like what's happening from a marketing perspective there? Because obviously there's loads of events for people in that sector, aren't there? So
yeah, I mean, it's you know, the audiovisual AV market has changed radically over the last 20 years. You know, when I first started working in it, it was about putting projectors on a ceiling and a screen on a wall in a, you know, meeting room. You know, today it's about digital transformation, collaboration, remote working, you know, all these kind of themes that are coming through. And it's kind of blended with the IT industry. You know, at one point they were very different industries, but now, as you know, a lot of AV equipment is all now networked and you know, programmable and whatever. The two kind of areas have, you know, the lines have blurred considerably. So it's much sort of bigger and more wide-ranging industry than it used to be. And I mean, sectors of it have been dramatically impacted by the pandemic. So the events industry, for example, died overnight. So, you know, companies who were running events for organisations just, you know, might have had 20 projects on the go that were just all cancelled, you know, literally overnight. And, you know, sadly, there's a lot of them that think they're not going to survive, because live events are probably one of the last things that are going to come back. You know, I don't think anyone's going to be holding any sales conferences or awards dinners in the near future. However, you know, what a lot of them have tried to do is take those events online, some of them very successfully. So, you know, you do see people that, in fact, there is an awards event that I know of that's going to be held online. And then there are other sectors of the industry that have done tremendously well. So one of my clients, for example, distributes solutions for space management. So they've got solutions that allow people to book a desk. The company can mark that desk up to say whether it's available or not, to say whether it needs cleaning. It can control the visitors coming into the building. They've got another solution that's all about remote collaboration, so people can work on whiteboards and collaborate with people, you know, all over the world. Everyone can contribute to these, to the kind of, you know, main canvas through their own device, so there's no sharing of touch screens or anything. And then they've got another solution that's all about sort of really clear audio on remote calls. So they had all these solutions anyway, and they're just really lucky that they all fit perfectly with the current situation. So they've been incredibly busy, and you know, they're in the same market as the events people, really, just a different area of it, but they've been very busy. And then I've got other clients who've kind of tried to evolve a bit. So, you know, obviously companies do not want teams of guys going in, fitting out their boardroom at the moment. But we're looking at new solutions like hand sanitizers with built-in digital signage screens. So, you know, Mark was doing some work for me at the moment for one client who's developed a whole range of these solutions. So you can, you know, obviously everybody's going to need hand sanitizing stations as they reopen, and these have sort of, you know, built-in messaging system, sort of non-contact thermometers, partitioning, that kind of thing. So, you know, they're a pretty, what's the word I'm after, you know, sort of nimble in terms of the way they can adapt, I think, probably more so than some other industries, because it's always been a very fast moving sector. So yeah, you know, winners and losers in the current situation. And, you know, in terms of where the industry is going, that sort of digital transformation is the big theme, where, you know, anything that can be digitized will be. That'll demand sort of lots of new skills as well. And, you know, it starts to introduce things like artificial intelligence and things like that, virtual reality. So all these kind of, you know, bits around the outside that are starting to become more mainstream now as well.
Excellent. So obviously you mentioned Mark's doing some work with you for one of those clients, but I know that you two have worked together over the years, loads of websites, that kind of stuff, and brochures and things like that as well. Are there sort of, is there anything kind of innovative that you're seeing out there at the minute? Any sort of examples of things that sort of stand out that you think?
Well, one thing I saw sort of just before lockdown, which I thought was really cool, was basically it's a printed brochure, and you open it up and there's like a little screen in it that plays a video. So you can actually send a video out, but like in a physical brochure. And I thought that was really cool. I was trying to convince one of my clients to go with it, but like at the moment the price, well they weren't too bad. I think they worked out about £15 each, which if you're doing this, you know, you could do a small run, but obviously you wouldn't do thousands and thousands of them. But, you know, if that takes off, I guess the price will come down. But I just thought that was neat. I liked that.
No, that is cool. I've been thinking about, I probably shouldn't say this on a live stream, but oh well. Sort of looking at like our, you know, our clients and, you know, what we could do at the minute that would be a little bit different, that, you know, we've got to that point where everyone's starting to come back into their business now, and we've not had a lot of contact. The social snippet, which normally goes in the post every month, you know, that's going for the first time since lockdown this month. So, you know, I'm sort of thinking, what can we do? Almost like a welcome back to the office kind of something, you know, that kind of traditional, I hate to use the phrase, but lumpy mail, you know, it's like, it's funny, these older tactics that we've kind of left behind because we've all gone so like fully immersed into the digital world still really, really work. So yeah, I really like the idea of that brochure for that reason.
Yeah, I mean, when I mentioned that I worked in a marketing agency, and they were actually part of an incentive travel company. So the company started off doing incentive travel, so they would take, you know, Peugeot's dealers off to Marbella or whatever. And the marketing side of it kind of grew from that, because, you know, around a trip like that, you obviously want communications and whatever. But it was really fun sometimes, because you'd put together, you know, sort of teaser packs for people. So everyone who qualified to go on the trip, you know, you might send them, you know, a cocktail stick and a little miniature rum, or, you know, so it's sort of silly little things to kind of give them a teaser about where they were going. And those kind of things used to go down brilliantly. I mean, they're a pain to organise, because you've got to collate physically, someone's got to collate all these things together and pack them up, although, you know, you can obviously outsource that. But yeah, people love to get a little package of something in the post, and they think, oh, you know, what's this? And, you know, we've all had them probably, and it's, you know, it's a nice little touch, and it certainly makes you remember the company that sent it to you.
It's just a little bit of, it's a bit of excitement, isn't it? And especially for, I mean, I imagine a lot of business owners have, you know, if you've got an office or whatever, you've probably been going in and checking the post intermittently and that kind of stuff. But it's amazing how much crap we get.
Yeah.
You know, so actually, if it is something in there that is just going to be, you know, something a little bit fun. So yeah, that's what I've been thinking about and looking at and that sort of stuff.
We're not going to revisit the plane idea.
Okay, so Karen, I want. Do you remember? Okay. Do you remember, like as a kid, having those, like, it was like a foam card and you'd push out the bits and they all slotted together to produce an aeroplane?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, Airfix? Is that Airfix?
Maybe.
What called?
No. But I want.
It's a bit simpler than Airfix.
Yeah.
They literally just slotted it together, didn't they?
Right. Mark
You're
won't let me
going
have
technical
it.
there, Amanda.
Mark, let me have it.
Hey, no, you're
Technically, it's up to you, Christina, isn't it?
yeah.
I think it's a brilliant idea.
I just query the cost.
I really want these phone.
You should just get them.
I tell you what, if you did it, I bet 90% of the people who got it would put them together and start flinging them across the office.
Okay, so to be right. So the full story is we go to a conference every year, and it's for Team, which is a membership organisation for the independent recruitment sector. And yeah, I want to have these aeroplanes for that event, because I just, when it comes to the gala dinner, I think it'd be brilliant. And then Mark was like, no.
I think it would be
chaos.
good.
Put one on everyone's.
They won't invite
everyone's
us back, it'd be
setting.
great.
You'd have to give them out after the awards bit, though.
They
Like,
won't
you'd
invite us
destroy their
back.
yearly awards. Free them by planes.
I just think it'd be so much fun.
Well, poor Georgia Giraffe has often been violated at some of these dinners, so maybe the aeroplanes would be a good distraction.
George was stolen, and we were sent photos of him being stuffed in the boot of someone's car, and then in their office, and so did
you get a ransom note?
Pretty much. Well, it was
Yeah.
a bit of a was it like he was with the newspaper or something, wasn't he? It was, yeah, really funny. Really.
Wasn't it last year he got stolen in the toilets? The girls' toilets. Some
Oh,
the
no,
girls.
they did ask.
They did, yeah.
I did
ask.
they? Okay.
That wasn't a steal.
I thought that was a steal. I thought that was quite a good one.
But that was we made the rookie mistake, though, weren't it? The first year we took him, we did take him to the dinner as well, and that's when he left us.
No.
Yeah.
That was
He
never
was
going to
never
end
going to come and
well.
stay after that.
You know what? Like, I don't know why I was so shocked that evening when I was walking around with, you know, in like a long black dress, and a 5-foot inflatable giraffe under my arm. I got some really odd looks, and you know, I
It's casual.
Yeah, I was just like, all right, mate.
Yeah.
Carry on, got in the lift. I think it is when lift doors open and there's a 5-foot inflatable giraffe. That's when it gets attention.
It blends in. What are you talking about?
We had a giant banana at one point. We used to leave that in various places, didn't we? In the building here, just for the giggle.
Used to live in the disabled toilet on the top floor.
That sounds a bit gross, if I'm honest, but
Paul has commented saying that a company called Braunston Limited used to do stuff like that, and they'd take all those giveaways like the planes and the inflatable giraffes to meetings, but then everyone would start, you know, it's kind of like these fidget spinners, I suppose. Everyone would start fiddling with the thing and not listening to the presentation. So pros and cons.
Yeah, give them out after the presentation, I suppose, is the lesson there.
We could put them in all the presentation rooms of our competitors.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so Karen, I've got one more question for you. Just so we're kind of going like round back to the beginning now. So I was talking to someone this week who is not a copywriter, and they're producing their own copy for a newsletter. So it is a different approach. I always think like my approach to newsletters is very much the same as my approach to blogs. So like what you've talked about already with your subheadings and that kind of stuff. But I think for this particular person, it's kind of, I know what I need to write about, but the individual's quite technically minded. So all the technical stuff comes out. So for people that are in that scenario and they need to kind of break it down and make that information more accessible, it's not just about the wording and the word choice. I think there's something else there in terms of how you kind of split out the information and know when you're trying to cram in too much. And I'm just thinking with like the AV people you work with, you know, they'd probably get really excited about their cabling and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a few, obviously, in technical industries, a lot of the manufacturers are Far Eastern. And, some of them are brilliant in terms of the material they produce. Some of them, you just kind of look at it and think, oh, God, what can I do with this? It's just, one company in particular, they're so proud of what they produce, but, it's written by a Japanese person with a basic grasp of English, and it's just so technical. And, it's unusable from a marketing point of view. So I have to rewrite it all. And it's a tricky one. I mean, I suppose my advice would be just to keep your audience in mind, because although it might be a technical product, your audience isn't necessarily a technical guy. I mean, if it is a technical person, then that's fine. You can focus on the bandwidth and the dongles and whatever they might need to know. But generally, if you're talking to a user, it's like if you buy a new car, you don't necessarily need to know how an engine works. You just want to know, how fast it goes and what the petrol consumption is and whatever. So it's the basics always apply. Focus on the benefits. So instead of saying it's got a X, Y, Z, ABC, this, that, and the other, so, this is what it's going to do for you. This is the problem it's going to solve. This is the benefit it's going to give you. This is the pain it's going to remove for you. And I think that rule applies whether you're writing for web, for physical brochures, for blogs, even as far as social media goes, although a bit more of a challenge when you've only got sort of limited amount of letters to do it in. But just, try and focus on what it does for you rather than the technical aspect of what it does.
Cool. That's really good advice. Really great advice. Mark, you have like let a couple of words slip, but have you got any questions for Karen at all?
Well, I suppose obviously it's thinking about, like you said, about the diversification of some of the AV clients. Is it led to you having to work slightly differently because they're going into different markets, or have they got the same markets but having to approach it differently?
Yeah, it's a bit of both, really, Mark. So one of my big clients is a distributor of equipment. So that means they're supplying resellers who would then supply end users. So now, if you wanted to buy one of their solutions, you would go to one of my clients' customers, if that makes sense. So so what they're trying to do, so obviously they've got this base of resellers already. And they're trying to find new solutions that will give those resellers a reason to go and talk to their customers. So, at the moment, there's no point saying, here's a great solution to kit out a boardroom, because the resellers say, well, none of my customers want their boardrooms kitting out at the moment. What we're trying to do is say, here's a solution for safe working, which you probably are being asked about. And may not know where to go to source such solutions. So we've put together these for you. So it's talking to the same customers generally, but just trying to find, diversify the solutions that are made available to them.
I imagine even some of the normal display things can work in those sort of new scenarios anyway. So I suppose it's just getting that idea out to people that wouldn't normally be purchasing that kind of thing, really.
Yeah, and in terms of displays, I mean, there's been a movement over the last sort of 5 years really to move away from projectors and screens to what we call displays, but flat screens in meeting rooms. I mean, projectors are still the best solution if you want a really clear big image, but just for something on a wall for a medium-sized meeting room, displays work perfectly well. But also, of course, there were tens of thousands of displays that went into the NHS during the pandemic, into all those new hospitals. They all had, big high brightness, high definition displays put in. So some of the, some resellers did really well out of that. And it's just kind of making sure that people, maybe products that they've currently been selling in one way, there's actually another way, because there's a big call for digital signage at the moment, because there's, we need to communicate information that's changing on a almost daily basis. So whereas they might have been showing corporate presentations on displays before, now it might be health information or, the latest government advice or whatever. So we have with the one client I mentioned that's kind of just coincidentally got all these fabulous solutions that meet the current sort of environment we find ourselves in quite well. We did actually go through all the government advice on safe return to work and then align the solutions that they offer with each piece of advice. And I've done a whole series of articles for them that sort of take each piece of advice, so whether it's social distancing, whether it's controlling people at your entrance, whether it's minimizing hot desking, and, sort of aligned each of their solutions up with that. So it's kind of, makes it very clear how people can meet the government guidelines using their tools.
Cool. Some of those products do look really good as well.
Yeah.
In some photos now, so I think they're, obviously irrelevant of the marketing side, they're a really useful way for some of the information to get out there while being practical as well. Yeah,
and one thing I have noticed is that manufacturers are collaborating. So, one of the solutions in the brochure you're doing for me, Mark, it's a people counting solution. So the displays are from Philips, who are a massive display manufacturer. The actual software that drives the whole system is from a company called Now Signage, and then the cameras that sort of identifying people going in and out from a company called Hike Vision. So they're three completely separate companies, and because each one could do an element of the solution, they've come together and packaged it up as a kind of total solution. And that's something that I've not seen that much in the past. It does happen occasionally, but I think that's happening more and more now.
Yeah, no, it's good.
So Amanda, have you got anything just before we finish off?
No, there's loads of useful tips in there, and it's quite interesting to hear, a specific industry perspective, because you're right, it's so hard for events. The amount of online events we've sort of suddenly been involved in or people are talking about is huge. So as you say, I can imagine it's really tough in that sector.
Yeah.
It was just really interesting to hear those points.
Yeah, I think as well, the stuff you've shared in regards to the sort of the copywriting as well is really, really valuable.
Yeah,
there's a lot of crossover with the advice we give anyway, but it's so important that yes, there's tons of information out there, but you kind of need to hear the same stuff from different sources.
Yeah.
You really kind of go, right, that's the way to go. So I'm always really keen to get people onto this that have some crossover with what we do, because actually sometimes we do have differences of opinions, sometimes the opinion is sort of a shared view, and I think that's really good to discuss. Cool. So let's wrap up this episode of the live lunch. Thanks, Karen, for
welcome.
I really appreciate it.
Asking me on.
What we'll do is we'll make sure we put a link to your LinkedIn profile, or whatever contact details you want. We'll make sure we add those in the comments so that people can reach out and connect with you.
Thank you.
And yeah, it's been fantastic. We'll be here again next week, Thursday at 12 noon for live lunch. I think it's just us next week, no guests. Jane will be back off holiday, so
Pam will be on holiday.
Online.
do you know what? Right, Jane was on holiday, and I think it was Monday. I think she went as far as Monday evening before she emailed me on a work thing. I was just like, I went to respond as well, and I was like, no, I'm just not going to answer it. If I respond, she'll respond again. But yeah, Jane, we miss you. If you see this. But yeah, we'll be back next Thursday. Thanks again, Karen. And yeah, goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
I think that was a good screenshot. Bye.